Primetime politics tonight. The backlogs continue at Canadian airports and the tourism industry worries the summer season could be a bust. Canada's Minister of Tourism is promising action, but what? The Tourism Minister, Randy Boissonault, will join me tonight. The government takes steps to fast-track proposed changes to the Broadcast Act to regulate streaming platforms. MPs will debate the latest moves. And our panel of parliamentary reporters on the Conservative leadership race and a foreign affairs faux pas on the Russian file. It will begin tonight with the ongoing chaos at major Canadian airports, and it's expected to get worse before it gets better, and with the busy summer travel season upon us now. A surge in travel, a shortage of staff, COVID measures, all contributing to long lineups, major delays and flight cancellations, and planes waiting hours on the tarmac. Federal government has now suspended random testing for arriving passengers who are vaccinated until the end of the month, and will move all testing off-site from the airports. That'll happen in July. But that doesn't solve the massive delays in security, baggage handling, and the offloading of arriving passengers. Today in the House of Commons, the opposition pressed for an end to all vaccine mandates, and that led to this apology from a Liberal MP who had apparently an angry exchange on social media over vaccine mandates. That was with a Canadian woman living in New Zealand, unable to fly home to visit family because she's not vaccinated.
Well, the Liberals are in fine form. They made a big announcement on Friday. Did they end mandates allowing people to return to work? Nope. No. Did they end mandates allowing all Canadians to travel by rail and air? No. Their solution was to pause random COVID testing for a couple of weeks. It was a joke. So will the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Health give us a date on when he'll end the mandates, or will he tell me to F off like he did to one of his constituents?
Last week I responded in an unacceptable way to a message on social media, and for that I deeply regret it. I want to apologize to the person that I offended and anybody else that I let down. I realize that the past 2 years have been really difficult for a lot of people, but my conduct was unacceptable. We have an obligation to disagree while being disagreeable, and in that regard I failed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Randy Boissonault is Canada's Minister of Tourism. He joins me now from the foyer of the House of Commons tonight to talk about the problems with air travel and the impact on Canadian tourism. Minister, good to see you again. You're in the middle of this airport chaos as Canada's Minister of Tourism, responsible for a sector that's been battered by the pandemic and is hoping for a big rebound this summer, and that's being jeopardized by the problems at the major airports. What's your reaction to what you're seeing? Let's start there.
Well, thanks for this opportunity, Peter. It's great to see you again. I'm going to be really blunt. I'm not happy with what's going on. We're leaning in on this every day. I work with Minister Alghabra, Minister Duclos, Minister Mendicino, and as you'll note, the announcement from last week with the pausing of random mandatory testing, and now, as of July 1st, moving that off-site. It's a good step in the right direction to make sure that we have increased flow, particularly at Pearson. There's a little bit of an issue at Vancouver, but quite frankly, I want to make sure that people have a seamless traveler experience and coordination in the system. What do I mean by that? The government's got to be at the table. We've got to make sure that the departments are being financed. We're doing that. We've got to make sure people are hired. We've got to work with the airlines and the airport authorities. The Greater Toronto Airport Authority has sent us a letter appreciating the steps that we're taking. There's a surge at Pearson, and I think we're looking at, sometimes at peak Pearson, and so we've got to get those bottlenecks out of the system. We've got to get people on the move. Peter, we had 22 million people here in 2019. I would say we're getting to about half to maybe 60% of the capacity. We've got to do better because I want people to come to Canada and remember their destination, not the experience they had at the airport.
Oh, okay, so as you try to make progress on this and sort of move this thing along, what's your understanding now of what's causing the biggest problem?
Well, I think we've got an issue of, we didn't have enough staff, and so we've addressed that with 865 CATSA members. 400 were already in the system. We've added 465. We've accelerated their training so that they can be on the front lines. And CATSA, just for people wondering what that acronym is, these are the people that process us when we get to the airport, that get us through the security screening. That's really important to get people on their way through the system. The other side is the Canadian Border Security Association and making sure that our CBSA officers are able to make sure that they process people quickly when they come into the country. So it's about getting Canadians and travelers out of the country, but it's also making sure that we don't have those bottlenecks when people are coming into the country.
What kind of, and I must be asking a lot here, but what kind of guarantees can you give the traveling public, domestic passengers or foreign passengers, as we head into what's hoped to be a busy tourism season? But at this point, looking at these images and what's happening in Canada, why would anyone fly here if they're going to be treated like this?
Well, they're going to fly to Canada because we have the safest jurisdiction in the world to travel to. We have some of the greatest wide open spaces, fabulous cities, amazing tourism attractions, Indigenous tourism opportunities. So there's a lot that people want to see in Canada, Peter, and a lot of Canadians want to travel around the country again after being in their apartments or their homes or their basements during COVID. And my job as tourism minister and my colleagues are taking this very seriously. That's why we made the announcement on Friday that at this particular part of June, we're going to make sure that where people used to get the random testing, that space is freed up, that personnel is freed up. We're going to reduce the congestion, and we're going to keep making moves so that, particularly at Pearson, but in other gateway cities, we're going to be able to keep people on the move. And Peter, I think that's another issue. We've got to look at getting people into the country from more than just one main airport. So Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Halifax, Winnipeg, let's have more flights. And the airlines control this. We don't control this as the government. But we need to have the airlines actually look at their capacity and start bringing Canadians in and travelers in to Canada from other points of entry.
I'll let you touched on it, capacity here. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Sure.
Air Canada has already said it'll reduce summer capacity by 20% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Some experts are now suggesting, look, you need to take measures to order the airlines to throttle back the number of passengers they'll carry until there's the staffing and infrastructure in place to deal with the higher volumes. What about that? Is that a possible solution?
Well, I'm not going to say that we should slow down the number of people here. I don't want to see 2,500 flights canceled like happened in the U.S. I already saw 2 Sundays ago when I was at Pearson coming in from Edmonton, over a dozen flights canceled, and I took photos of the whole matter, and I saw how many people were in the line, and it's completely unacceptable, and I don't want Canadians going through that. I don't want international visitors or Canadians coming home spending 15 minutes, let alone 3 hours on the tarmac.
Right, but as long as airlines continue to fly the numbers of people they're flying and to offer those kinds of, I'm getting emails every day about the special summer flight rates and so on, but the infrastructure is not there right now to handle it. So, what makes you think the flights won't continue to be canceled or delayed and planes won't keep sitting on tarmacs? It's
a coordination issue. We're working with the airlines, the airports, and all of my colleagues, all of the different departments to get this work done and to get it right. And I can say that, airlines have a responsibility to make sure that they're fully staffed up as well. So that means, across the system, you've seen the labor issues we've had in the country. So it means that private sector organizations, private sector companies have to pay people what they're worth to make sure that they come to work and stay at work and grow great careers. On the government side, I'm going to make sure that the financing's there, working with my colleagues to make sure that the people are there so that we have a great seamless traveler experience this summer.
Is it time to drop vaccine mandates and the requirement for the Arrive Canada app? That's what many of your critics have been calling for.
I thought you might ask me that question, Peter. Look, if vax mandates were what's causing the issue, we would see this at every airport and all of the airports that I mentioned before and more. It's not. We've got a congestion issue at Pearson. We've got a little bit of stickiness at Vancouver. It's not a system-wide issue. And as I said when I became Minister of Tourism, safety first, then travel. So I don't know what COVID's going to throw at us this fall. Peter, I've had it, but I'm done with the whole COVID pandemic experience. We're going to keep Canadians safe, and we're going to do the right thing.
All right. Minister of Tourism, Randy Boissonault. Good to talk to you again, Minister.
Thanks,
Take
Peter.
care.
All the best.
Well, the Prime Minister says he is isolating again after testing positive for COVID-19 a second time. Justin Trudeau just returned this weekend from the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. Trudeau says he feels okay and says that's because he's had his shots. He last tested positive in January. Well, the federal government is taking procedural steps to fast-track the controversial legislation to regulate online streaming platforms in this country. Bill C-11, which involves an overhaul of the Broadcasting Act for the first time in 3 decades to include the online platforms, is currently before the House of Commons Heritage Committee, but the government wants that study shut down now to get the bill passed by the House before the summer break, even though it's not likely to be passed by the Senate until the fall. So what's the big rush, and why are some critics pressing for changes to the bill? Let's bring in three members of the House of Commons Heritage Committee to debate that. Chris Bittle is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage. Rick Perkins is an Associate Member of the committee. He's a Conservative MP. And Peter Julian is the Heritage Critic for the NDP. It's good to see you all. Mr. Bittle, let me start with you. What's the urgency to get this bill pushed through the House in the next few days if it's not going to be passed by the Senate until the fall?
Well, I don't know that urgency is the right word. We do want to see this through, but we agreed with the Conservatives in terms of the amount of time and witnesses that they wanted to call. We exceeded that number. And then we've spent 2 weeks worth of committee time just on filibuster. Mr. Perkins, who's here, is not a regular member of the committee, but showed up for 3 hours last week to filibuster and talk it through. There's no end in sight. There's no positive contribution from the opposition. And we need to get this bill through to help our creators, including digital-first creators, because as you said, the Broadcasting Act hasn't been amended in over 30 years when I was still in elementary school. And the landscape has changed significantly. And so we need to get this through. We need to get it on the Senate, which I know will engage in thoughtful study. But we've spent a lot of time on this, and we need to get it through.
All right, Mr. Perkins, your party, you just heard it again, is accused of filibustering the bill. You personally accused of taking part in that at the Heritage Committee. There have been 29 hours of debate, 48 witnesses. How do you respond to accusations of filibustering, and what are your party's key objections to this bill that you think needs more study?
Well, the bill is not clear, and the CRTC and the minister have contradicted each other on whether or not individual user-generated content will actually be regulated by the CRTC. And so we're very concerned about that. The government imposed closure at second reading stage. I spoke to the bill in the House at second reading stage. And now they're imposing a form of closure on committee witnesses. Committees are the destiny, in charge of their own destiny, and quite often in committees they don't get to all the witnesses that they want to see in the time frame that is allotted. So they often alter their schedule in order to hear from more witnesses.
Right.
We were wanting to hear from more witnesses. There have been a number of concerned people who earn their income through the internet that have concerns with this bill, and we think better amendments come from hearing from witnesses. And now the government has done the very unusual step of putting closure not only on the amount of time we have for clause by clause in committee, but also only 1 day of report stage and 1 day of third reading. It's very unprecedented that the government is doing that kind of closure.
All right. Mr. Julian, does the NDP support fast-tracking this bill through the House, and if so, why?
Well, it's not fast-tracking at all, Peter. It's been nothing but chaos and disruption for the last few weeks. In fact, the Conservatives even filibustered witnesses, like the chair of the CRTC, that they filibustered to prevent him from testifying in the leadership of the CRTC. It's been chaotic. It's been bizarre. All the other parties submitted amendments more than a week and a half ago. We just learned on Friday that the Conservatives have submitted their amendments. And part of the job of a committee is to take the witnesses, the vast majority of whom have been supportive of C11, and many of whom have had suggestions on how to improve the bill, is to actually take that witness testimony and those suggested amendments and work through them and vote on them. That's our job. And the Conservatives have stopped systematically the committee from actually doing its job on behalf of Canadians. So we believe we need to look at all of those amendments. We need to have votes to make sure that the committee decides whether or not those amendments will carry or not. But are you
satisfied that every voice that needs to be heard on this has been heard?
Well, the Conservatives were blocking witnesses from actually coming forward. We tried to work to have some further witnesses come in, but the reality is that all the witnesses have had their opportunity to provide that important information on how to improve the bill. Okay. But if we never get to the amendments, then we don't get to that actual possibility of amending the legislation.
Okay. Mr. Bittle, one of the big criticisms of this bill, and Mr. Perkins alluded to it, and you've heard it from some witnesses at your committees, that it seeks to regulate social media platforms the same way as it would regulate the big broadcasters and cable companies and streaming services. How concerned should Canadians be about the regulating of user-generated media on social media sites through this legislation?
They shouldn't be concerned. We've been clear. Platforms have obligations under this legislation. Users will have no obligations. There are several clauses throughout the bill, including a clause that Conservatives brought in under the predecessor legislation, C10, that's still in the legislation to protect user-generated content. This is about going after and ensuring that foreign tech giants like YouTube and TikTok have to contribute to Canadian culture, like we would expect Bell and Rogers to do so. Why would Google and TikTok and other major companies get off scot-free? It's about ensuring that that companies contribute to that to Canadian culture, which is something I hope we all agree on, and something that even digital creators should be able to benefit from, because we've heard lots of testimony that YouTube and TikTok aren't contributing and aren't even paying their own artists very well.
All right, let me move to Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins, why don't you accept those reassurances from the government side?
Well, we've been asking for them to issue their direction to the CRTC that clarifies it, and the government is refusing to do so. The bill requires that the providers like YouTube and Netflix put user-generated Canadian content at the top, which means that they have to play with algorithms. It also requires that anybody that is directly or indirectly their content is generating revenue, that they will now be regulated by the CRTC, and they've said so. So almost everything on the internet generates some sort of revenue for someone. Somebody shares it, and there's advertising beside that particular content that's generated. So that means everything, which has everything you post has a user identification on it, has an ad next to it. It generates revenue indirectly. Therefore, the CRTC can regulate it. We've got over 60 more witnesses that wanted to appear that the Liberals and the NDP together are preventing from appearing. There's a lot more work to be done on this bill. And as Mr. Bittle said, it's been 31 years. So another few months isn't going to hurt.
Mr. Julian, we have the government denying the bill regulates user content. Conservatives say it does, in fact. We did have the CRTC chair telling the committee that he believes the bill does allow for that authority for the agency to regulate user content, but he said the CRTC has no intention of doing that. So what's your view on all of this and user content, whether this, as some critics have said, is going to amount to censorship?
He also said that the Broadcasting Act already gives the CRTC power, right? So, I mean, this is the nuance that the Conservatives refuse to talk about, is that those provisions were already there. The CRTC finally was able to testify and answered, I thought, very effectively that question of the Conservative spin around this. Conservatives have also been saying that somehow C11 impacts the government following people on cell phones. I mean, it's been crazy, some of the things that Conservatives have put forward, that it's all about censorship. It's just bizarre. So I think our job as a committee is to go through the many amendments that people have offered that will improve the bill to finally get that work done. And quite frankly, the Conservative antics and the disruption over the last few weeks, I don't think has been a high point at all in Parliament.
Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at there. Time is short, but this process continues to unfold over the next couple of days here in Parliament, so we'll keep our eye on it. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs says it's unacceptable that one of her departmental employees attended a Russian celebration last Friday in Ottawa. The deputy head of protocol accepted an invitation to a reception at the Russian embassy to mark Russia Day, while Canada has slapped sanctions, frozen assets, and almost daily decried Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
The reality is this should never have happened, and this will not happen again. I'm the minister, and the buck stops here. And so I share the frustration and the anger of Canadians regarding this issue.
Well, let's bring in two colleagues now from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Marieke Walsh is a reporter with the Globe and Mail, and Joël-Denis Bellavance is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for La Presse. Good to see you both. Marieke, let's start with this faux pas at Foreign Affairs. The minister saying it's unacceptable, but minister wouldn't answer questions about whether she knew in advance about this visit to the Russian Day celebration or not by a Canadian Foreign Affairs official. So what do you make of this?
Well, certainly it's interesting that she's not answering that question, right, Peter? Because if she knew about it, then it raises questions about her own political judgment If she didn't know about it and she's trying not to throw her colleagues, the bureaucrats in her department, under the bus, then maybe that speaks to some ministerial accountability. But certainly it's clear that the government realized too late that this was unacceptable.
Joël-Denis, what are your thoughts on this, and whether there's a disconnect here? If the minister didn't know about it, what's the Department of Foreign Affairs doing, sending people to a Russia Day celebration?
Yeah, there is clearly a lack of communications. I think the latest news on the war in Ukraine was not sent to that particular employee of the Foreign Affairs Department. But clearly, I'm sure that Madame Joly is really angry. Well, that's what she says publicly. But I think there's probably one person who's even more angry, if I may say. That would be Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, because she's been the lead person, if I may say, on the Russia-Ukraine file since the beginning. And she also managed to assemble a coalition of the willing, if I may say, of like-minded countries to impose very severe sanctions on Russia. So I'm sure that message is not, running well across the not only the country but also across other allies of Canada that are trying to force Russia out of Ukraine.
And are there sort of different levels, Marieke, to the relationship? Because we haven't expelled the Russian ambassador to Canada. We maintain a Canadian ambassador in Russia. So we are maintaining diplomatic ties. So some might argue, look, this is keeping channels open by sending somebody to this celebration, but is that too much of a reach?
I think it is. I mean, I think, the Conservatives are already attacking the Liberals for keeping the embassy open at all. The Liberals explain keeping it open as that need to keep lines of communications open, but that doesn't mean you need to go to parties to celebrate the Federation. I think that's where the step is too far. And I think that's why we saw the government climb down so quickly from defending it to then apologizing for it, because they realized it was an untenable move. And as Joël-Denis said, very dramatically out of step with all of the messages from the government since February and before then. And I don't think it's only Chrystia Freeland who has taken on that mantle. I think Mélanie Joly has also really tried to own that mantle of supporting Ukraine. And so it's out of step with her own personal politics right now.
All right, Joël-Denis, sorry, jump in. Go ahead. Yeah.
Quickly, if I may add on this one, it may also be used by Russia for propaganda purposes. So that's, not only damage control here in Canada, but the Canada may have also to face some propaganda from Russia that using this as a way that things are going back to normal.
All right, let's talk about the Conservative leadership race now. Marieke, the latest developments, almost all of the other candidates lining up to attack Pierre Poilievre over his claims of membership recruitment. What do you think this tells us about how the vetting process will go for these memberships? The party's going to take some time to vet all these memberships. Should we expect a lot of challenges coming from other leadership candidates who don't believe the numbers, challenge the numbers, or at least do so publicly?
I think it shows you the monumental task ahead for the party, which they say they will be able to do, process all of these new memberships, verify all of them before all of the timelines to get the paper ballots out, mail them out, get them mailed back in. I think in terms of the strategy for the campaigns, though, for the opponents of Pierre Poilievre, I think it shows that they really are on their back foot right now, because Pierre Poilievre is the only one who has come close to showing any kind of receipts or detailed breakdown of his numbers, which means it's also the easiest to then challenge him when those finalized numbers come out from the party. The other opponents are all criticizing Pierre Poilievre's campaign's numbers and raising skepticism and doubt around them, but not actually showing anything from their own. And when you look at having more than 600,000 members in the party, 300,000 from Pierre Poilievre actually seems like it could be possible, depending on what the other campaigns came up with, which they won't tell us.
Yeah, interesting. Joël-Denis, what are your thoughts on this? Jean Charest, coined another phrase over the weekend, Pierre inflation. He's now coined it for what he says are the exaggerated membership claims by Pierre Poilievre. Says must be recruiting members in New Hampshire, according to Jean Charest. But what about the Charest strategy here, and which is to basically suggest that Poilievre's not telling the truth about those claims?
Well, you need to bring in some evidence that Mr. Poilievre is not telling the truth about the numbers, but so far the other camps have not done it. So we're forced to believe what Mr. Poilievre is saying, and what the other camps are saying. It is not, yes, they are attacking the numbers, but what's the proof that it's not valid? And in the meantime, I think the task of the party is to make sure that this does not turn into a shouting match for 2 months about the numbers of the memberships. Otherwise, people will lose interest in that leadership race. And I think it would be to the advantage of the party to say right away, we will organize another debate. So you change the tune and the narrative on this race, which is right now about fights about the number of memberships, to about more policies of what the candidates would be proposing. So it might be to the advantage of the party to have that third debate that some candidates are demanding.
Yeah, most of them, I think, are up for another debate. But Marieke, what kind of challenges, if it's a lengthy vetting process, the party's promising, look, you'll get lists, no later than the end of July. That's an awful long, a long time away. And what kind of a challenge does that present for the other candidates in terms of trying to go after people who may have signed on with other candidates as their supporters, but they're the people they try to reach in this persuasion phase to convince them to come over to them?
Exactly. The persuasion phase is essentially on hold for a month, Peter. And maybe that's why, as Joël-Denis said, we have this fight over numbers, because there's not much else to talk about. Because until they have the contact details for all of these new members, they can't contact them. They can't try to convince them, which makes the already uphill battle of convincing somebody who signed up for Pierre Poilievre to switch to Charest even more challenging, because the timeline is so much shorter. I'm curious if the party will actually move ahead with another debate, only in part because I think that it's another task for them to do when they already have a mountain of work ahead of them. And we'll see, I guess, if they do decide to do it. But all candidates, if they do decide to schedule, would have to attend, because there are penalties if they don't.
All right, fairly quick answers needed here in the time we have left. But Joël-Denis, lots more questions for the Public Safety Minister, Marco Mendicino, over the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act and why it was done and at whose behest. What do you think of how he's handling these questions?
Well, poorly, if I may say, because there are two versions that are contradictory, and only one of them is true, obviously. One version is that the minister was asked by a police organization to invoke the law, and the other version is that they didn't ask for it, but we're happy to get the new additional powers that were, part of the invocation of the La Loi sur mesures d'urgence Emergencies Act. So I guess the only way to find out is if the cabinet release confidential documents to Justice Rouleau, who's actually looking at this in his inquiry. That's the only way we'll be able to go to the bottom of this affair. But clearly, Mr. Mendicino is on the defensive in the House of Commons today, and he will be for the remaining of the session.
What are your thoughts on that, Marieke?
Certainly, I'm not sure that we've seen the government commit to releasing those cabinet documents. I think the journalists and many other people would be keen to see them as well. I think, for the government, you would have expected that they would have a more clear explanation of events, given the unprecedented nature of this invoking of the act. The fact that it was going to spark this review from the justice, that it was going to spark a committee hearing on this. You would think that they had a lot going on in February with the convoys, but that would be really buttoned down. And it's surprising to me that this is actually tripping them up right now.
All right. We'll see where it goes. Thank you both, Marieke Walsh and J.D. Bellavance. Good to talk to you both.
Thank you.
And that is all for another edition of Primetime Politics. I'm Peter Van Dusen. From all of us here at CPAC, thanks for watching. Until next time.